Just over 24 hours until the deadline to form a government, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu grapples to pull together what looks to be a weak and unstable coalition. In Geneva, the UN begins hosting talks with the Syrian government and some 40 different rival factions, as Amnesty International reports evidence of war crimes in Aleppo. And U.S. President Barack Obama nominates Marine General Joseph Dunford as the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who, if approved, will have to take his experience in Afghanistan to advising Obama on the American fight against the Islamic State. Good evening and welcome to the news today. It's been a hectic and unpredictable few days in Jerusalem as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu grapples to pull together a government coalition by tomorrow at midnight. Yesterday, Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman stunned the political establishment, announcing he would not be part of the coalition. It's left Netanyahu in a weak position with tough options. We'll look at what those are 24 hours before the deadline. But first, here's a quick look back.
אני רוצה לקבל אותך בחזרה, בשמחה. תודה רבה. תודה לכם.
החלטתי היא א', להתפטר מתפקידי כשר החוץ. אני בתום הישיבה אגיש את ההתפטרות לראש הממשלה, למזכירות הממשלה, וכמובן ההודעה ברורה שאנחנו לא מצטרפים לקואליציה.
نحن نمنع اليمين من تشكيل الحكومة القادمة.
And with me to begin the show tonight is Aviv Bushinsky, former media advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and professor of political science, Dr. Hani Zubaydah. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. A pleasure to have you with me.
Thank you for having us.
So I want to begin quickly. 6 weeks ago, Benjamin Netanyahu had a big win, a strong mandate, a very clear path to the next government. 6 weeks later, he's in a very weak position. Before we get to how he got to that weak position, where do we stand right now?
Well, right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is courting Naftali Bennett, the head of the Jewish Home Party. He's been courting him for 2 days. Naftali Bennett will not sit with him. For the past 2 days, he's not been answering his phone calls, and he completely held on all negotiations. Nobody has the mandate to sit with Benjamin Netanyahu. No negotiations. They want to see him tormented, and they would like to see him increase the offer. They're looking for something bigger, much more meaningful, and they're going to hurt the Likud members. They're not going to hurt the other coalition members. They're not going to touch Kahlon with the Kulanu party. They're not going to touch Shas and Aryeh Deri. They're looking to hurt within the Likud, and they have one main goal. Benjamin Netanyahu still had a major victory of the last election. The one thing that he didn't do is he didn't utilize this as a jumping board towards a coalition, a very comfortable coalition, and now he's paying the price.
On that note, he could have used it as a very comfortable coalition. He could have maybe made some moves. Somebody who's very politically astute could have made other moves that would put him in a better position now.
I'm not that sure because this is almost his fourth term, about to be his fourth term, and Netanyahu suffers one big issue, personal issue. He has a personal issue both, as Hani mentioned, with Naftali Bennett, who used to work for Netanyahu, and with Avigdor Lieberman, who also used to work for Netanyahu, and since then they had cat and mouse or bad blood between the two. Netanyahu failed to bridge this personal gap, and that's why we are facing this situation. The fact that Lieberman decided not to join the government was a big blow for Netanyahu. I spoke both to Lieberman prior to his decision, and I know that most of it was personal, and of course, Lieberman wanted to do some rehabilitation and try to be a potential leader in the future, and he realized that by being in the opposition, he'll have better chance. I think that Netanyahu and Netanyahu's staff didn't forecast the fact that Lieberman will eventually drop this generous offer by being a foreign minister.
Before we get into a little more of these seemingly a lot of personal elements that are making their way into this coalition building, let's go to Jerusalem, to the Israeli Prime Minister's office, where Eli Ochenberg is standing by. Eli, as we've sort of mentioned here so far, every minute counts at this point. What have the last hours held from your view?
Absolutely, Nurit. Well, tomorrow by midnight, the deadline will expire, and Naftali Bennett, holding the lead, holding the gun, is decided to hold by himself the negotiations with Benjamin Netanyahu. But there was a very crucial problem that he simply didn't answer his phone in the last couple of hours. But so everything is being really stretched out to the very last moment. But the bottom line is that Bennett will demand yet another high-profile portfolio for his party after really being left with almost nothing in the coalition negotiations. With Netanyahu now have a very tight range of maneuverability.
Eli, Aviv Bushinsky already mentioned it a little bit in the studio here, that it seems to be a lot of personal issues, and when we're talking about Naftali Bennett and Benjamin Netanyahu, that's certainly a big issue here.
Yes, absolutely. It's a bad romance, a lot of bad blood between the two. It goes way back to the time Bennett worked at the Prime Minister's office. But at the moment of truth, Bennett did his very best to contribute to the glorious victory of the right-wing bloc in the last elections. But right after that, he was again left with pretty much nothing or nothing significant in the last in the upcoming government. So now we will have to see if Naftali Bennett will be able to put aside the will for revenge and join Netanyahu's right-wing government. But to understand a bit further, let's watch the next report.
We have achieved a great victory for our people. And I'm proud of the Israeli people.
It was a sweeping victory. After a harsh, exhausting campaign, Benjamin Netanyahu led the ruling Likud party to 30 seats on behalf of the right-wing nationalist camp. A crucial contributor to this victory was the Jewish home leader Naftali Bennett, who sacrificed his own personal success, ending up with only 8 seats for the sake of the same right-wing bloc.
The national camp has won. We are in it for the long run.
And indeed, the long run is what counts. From a big winner, Netanyahu is now on the edge of being unable to form a stable government. One of his so-called natural allies, the ultra-nationalist Israel Beitenu party, with 6 seats, has opted to sit in the opposition. All that Netanyahu has left for now is the possibility of a fragile coalition with a paper-thin majority, 1 seat. And Bennett has turned from an electoral failure into the kingmaker.
The day the Jewish home will lead Israel is close.
Well, not that big of a shift. There are many possible scenarios at this point, some more likely than others. But the bottom line, the big challenge for both Netanyahu and Bennett, is to try and put the egos to one side, collaborate, and establish a government. A good one, a stable one, a lasting one. This, as the cliché has it, only time will tell.
So, Dr. Zubaydah, what were Netanyahu's main obstacles in this coalition, in this negotiation, going from the successful winner to being in such a position of weakness?
Well, I think if we look at the literature, political science literature, minimum winning coalition is the best coalition because everybody is what you call incarcerated inside. You cannot leave because you cannot threaten.
Incarcerated is an interesting choice of words.
But they are. Literally, they are. It's kind of like a prison because you cannot leave. You cannot really threaten me to leave. You cannot play chicken with me. Because if you leave, we all know that everything falls apart. It's 50% plus 1. And 61 is the ideal government. However, there's one problem with that. You need some kind of an ideological glue to hold the components together. And right now what we see is that Benjamin Netanyahu does not have this ideological glue with the person that is most likely to be his ideological partner, Naftali Bennett, who is running to the right, while Benjamin Netanyahu is portraying himself as center-right leader. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu also has one major issue, and that major issue is the personal grudge, as Aviv said, and I wholeheartedly agree. And we did not even started to discuss the issues of Ayelet Shaked.
Ayelet Shaked, I understand now as we speak, that Naftali Bennett is presenting a sort of ultimatum to Benjamin Netanyahu concerning Ayelet Shaked.
Well, it's not an ultimatum. It's a do or die thing, because right now Naftali Bennett holds all the cards. Right now what Naftali Bennett, well, according to the Jewish Home Party, if Netanyahu puts the security ministry on the table, done deal, they're signing right now and they'll go into coalition. One scenario, security and another major cabinet and they're good. However, if Netanyahu offers the foreign ministry, then the situation is that they would like to get the education ministry plus a third ministry, most likely well, either the national security, the Interior National Security Ministry, or the legal ministry, and they want to put Ayelet Shaked at the head of that ministry by name. By name, sorry.
Yeah, and not the sports and the culture.
No, not the sports and culture. That's off the table. This will not be...
Let's step out of internal Israel for just a moment and look at the bigger picture of Israel vis-a-vis the international community, because whether the government, whether Benjamin Netanyahu would like to look at that or not, it's a harsh reality, and we've seen the relationships with the United States really take a hit over the past year. If we do see a government that is conservative, that has a strong ultra-Orthodox presence, what does that mean for beginning to repair ties with the United States that took such a hit?
I'll answer by elaborating something that Dr. Zbeda mentioned. It's true. I most likely will have a 61 government within 20 hours from now. Yes. It's a minority, not a minority, but it's the minimum majority.
And it's a weak government.
It's a weak government, and there is some precedence to it. Shamir and Rabin, both of them had governments like that and lasted for 3 years. But, and there's a big but, both of them, if I'm not mistaken, lost their elections right afterwards. And the reason is mainly when you have a 61-seat government, it's a stagnant, paralyzed government. And then it works both ways, on the economy, internal affairs, and foreign affairs. Netanyahu will not be able to do anything, any concessions to the Palestinians, anything that is to go a leap forward to the Americans. And I think that this be a very bad situation internally and externally.
This is exactly the point you mentioned, the word that is not mentioned much in the election campaign and still now, Palestinians. Is there any government, the way we see it now, 24 hours before the deadline, any government coalition that we can envision where peace negotiations with the Palestinians will be clearly and firmly on the table?
Yes, only one. If in the next 24 hours, Isaac Herzog will sign, the Zionist Union leader will sign a coalition agreement with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, or there's another option that Netanyahu will start with a coalition of 61 and will fetch for an opportunity to call Isaac Herzog and say, okay, let's now promote peace. But this is a game that Netanyahu already played.
Yeah, that's not realistic, because that's my next point, because I think right now as we see the government is being held as by the hands
being held at the mercy of smaller parties.
The hands of each and every party. And I think that at this moment, looking 6 months into the future, the time that everybody believes that he will approach Isaac Herzog again, I think he will not have a sound ground to say, we've made some progress, come join us.
I agree.
If he can do it within the next 24 hours, and he might, because there's something on the table that he can give. He can give a full rotation, and he can allow Isaac Herzog to be the first prime minister. He can do that. That's in his...
And here's the major question. Isaac Herzog made it very clear after the election that he will be in the opposition. He made it clear very recently on Israel's army radio that that is out of the question of unity government. Is it just political talk?
Of course it's political talk. You can, and it's easy to tell, because Isaac Herzog didn't criticize Netanyahu from the moment he lost the elections, from the moment Herzog lost the elections. Not about the nuclear, not about the relationship with the U.S., not about the peace, the dying peace process, and not regarding the what Netanyahu is willing to give to the religious parties. So I think that Herzog is looking or would like to join the government, of course on some conditions, but his major problem is to convince his members in the party to go ahead and
Herzog, which he will not be able to do, because right now as it looks, half of his party would abandon. Right now as it looks, half of his party will abandon, because first thing first, Benjamin Netanyahu will put a caveat on the joining of Tzipi Livni into the government. That's a no-no for him. A deadlock, no. She has 6 members of the party. Other 6 members that were discussed are Stav Shafir, Sheli Yachimovich, Yossi Ona. There were other 6 members of the party. Well,
but how much leverage does Netanyahu have at this point to draw the lines?
I'm sorry. Well, Netanyahu has 0 leverage right now. Netanyahu has 0 leverage because he has 24 hours to submit a government. Otherwise, he will be the only parliament member in the Israeli Knesset that cannot be a prime minister until the next election. That's the law.
I agree with you, but I still think that Naftali Bennett, maybe he's threatening, as Eli mentioned, with his gun, but with blank bullets, because Naftali Bennett cannot allow himself to be the one who is dismantling or is killing the dream of a right-wing national government. And therefore, at the end of the day, they will consolidate and will form some kind of a government.
It's incredible that a string of names that are little known outside of Israel can actually have such a hand in determining Israel's policy for the next X number of years. Unfortunately, we don't know how many.
Well, it's looking back at the Prime Minister's office. Everything started from the Prime Minister's office, while all the names that we're dropping here. We started with Avigdor Lieberman, we went on to Naftali Bennett, and then we spoke about Ayelet Shaked, and let us add to the issue Yoaz Hendel. All of them worked personally with the Prime Minister and had a fallout with him or his wife.
And you'll follow up in the next 24 hours when we know a little more definitively if and what kind of coalition will be. Aviv Bushinsky, Dr. Hani Zubeida. In the meantime, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
And we're shifting now from the very turbulent week in the Israeli government to elsewhere in the Middle East, to Syria, where the word turbulent doesn't even begin to describe the crisis. Over 4 years into the war, the UN is today hosting another round of separate talks with some 40 different rival factions to try to kickstart a real solution. Also today, Amnesty International has released a new report documenting alleged war crimes by both the regime and the opposition. Before we discuss, Uri Shapira takes a closer look.
A smell of death everywhere. This quote from an Aleppo resident can easily define the situation in the war-torn Syrian city. Amnesty International released a critical report Tuesday on the situation in the northwestern city. The report includes horrific evidence from eyewitnesses describing children without heads and streets filled with blood. Amnesty accuses all parties of what it says are war crimes in Aleppo. Ever since the Syrian civil war began in 2011, Aleppo, the largest city in the country, has come under severe attack both from President Assad's forces and from opposition groups. It is now controlled by numerous factions, including the government, the Kurds, and extremists from the Al-Nusra Front. The Amnesty report says that barrel bomb and other airstrikes have killed, injured, and displaced tens of thousands of civilians. Meanwhile, a new round of talks to resolve the conflict is starting in Geneva. The talks, expected to bring together representatives from the Syrian government and the opposition, are expected to last at least 6 weeks. But even before the dialogue gets underway, the UN envoy for Syria doesn't sound too optimistic.
There is no beginning, no middle, and end here. No big round table with multilateral representation. No big communique expected at the end. And these are not yet peace talks. These are closed, low-key, separate, structured discussions with the parties.
And as the talking resumes, the fighting continues. Now the focus is shifting to the port city of Latakia, a major government stronghold and the heartland of Assad's minority Alawite community. The city is currently under a major attack with dozens of casualties.
And joining me now on set is Hamad Awidat, reporter for Iranian Press TV. Good evening. Thanks very much for being with me. So we hear this Amnesty International report. I want to step away from their reports of war crimes, both by the regime and the opposition, for a moment and go to the sort of situation on the ground. We've heard recently White House officials being quoted anonymously saying Assad is losing power significantly. From your perspective, what's the picture of Bashar al-Assad today?
the pictures like this, where I think it's not the time to talk about the peace and all of these talks.
What's going on now in Geneva?
Yeah, it's not the time. There's fighters and there's tourists there in Syria. In all of Syria, and they are fighting and killing people and destroying and damaging in that land. And someone now have to control and to talk to all of the Assad government, and also to the Iranians, to Hezbollah, and also to the Saudis, to the Turkish, to everyone that he's get involved in the crisis in Syria there, in this killing machine there, and just to stop fighting, to stop this blood machine. That's the target that have to be now. It's not the talks, because I think there was Geneva 1 and there was Geneva 2, and also there was talks in Moscow and there was talks everywhere. We didn't hear that they achieved any goal for the Syrian people. We need the Syrian people to achieve their goal, which means their goal to just to sleep in peace.
When we say stop the fighting is the goal, that's clear. If we have, as I just mentioned, in Geneva today, 40 different factions, something like this, that are there even just to discuss. And this, of course, is just a fraction of the actual different rebel groups that are in the broader picture. How do you begin to do that? How do you begin to stop the fighting?
To stop the fight, first of all, these diplomatic efforts and work, they have to look after the people that they can control, the ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra Front and all, because they are the problems here. The problems here, they are not the opposition side, and it's not the Free Syrian Army. And I believe that there is no more Free Syrian Army in that area, and it's not the Syrian, also the government Syrian army. The problem there is ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra and all of these takfiris, that they are fighting there. And just for now, also the oppositions, they can't control the fights there, so they have to look for someone that he can control the fight.
I'll come back to you in a moment. Before we continue on that, let's return to the Amnesty International report from today. For a moment, with us from London is Philip Luther, Director of the Mideast and North Africa Program at Amnesty. Good evening, Philip. Thanks very much for being with me.
Good evening.
So we just heard a few moments ago the report on your report today about Aleppo. What were your most significant findings?
Well, we've looked at the situation in Aleppo, specifically the city of Aleppo, over the last year. And we've concluded that the government forces, the Syrian government forces, have carried out a campaign of air attacks that we believe deliberately targeted civilians, particularly with barrel bombs. And we believe that it's been so systematic that it amounts to crimes against humanity. We also have accused opposition groups, armed opposition groups, of using imprecise weapons, shelling indiscriminately civilian areas, and also killing civilians, and in some cases we believe these are war crimes.
Philip, when we're talking about opposition groups that are also accused of something on the level of war crimes, can we say which opposition groups we're speaking about?
Yes, but it's quite a mix of groups that operate in the Aleppo area. There are around 18 armed groups. I mean, the factions divide and subdivide sometimes, but around 18 armed opposition groups that operate in the Aleppo area. And so where we've been able to get information which group was responsible, we've said so in the report. Now, some of the worst abuses have been when those groups have used what are essentially makeshift weapons, like so-called hell cannons. Now, these are improvised rockets fitted with gas canisters. And they just can't be aimed with any accuracy, and they've been responsible for many civilian deaths.
Philip, when we're talking then about this many groups and a difficulty in distinguishing between them, even just in one city in Aleppo, how do you go about sourcing the evidence for this kind of report to identify where war crimes are being perpetrated and by whom?
Well, it's not easy. We've conducted this research over 4 months. We interviewed around 80 current and former residents of Aleppo, eyewitnesses, medics, rescue workers. We corroborated witness testimony by looking as well at secondary source material, photos, videos, reports from other organizations, including the UN-mandated International Commission of Inquiry. We also put some of our concerns to the Syrian authorities. We did that back in March. We haven't got a response. We also trawled through all the government statements that we could find about these attacks, and there's very little in the public domain. So they're not explaining themselves either.
Philip Luther, a very important report. Thanks very much for taking the time tonight. Hamad, back to you for a moment. Philip was speaking about the weapons. We're speaking about a report that is the use of weapons that are used to perpetrate war crimes. The weapons are coming from a certain source, a variety of sources. Iran is one of those for the Assad regime. Where is Iran in all of this at the moment? The Syrian defense minister was in Tehran just last week.
Listen, there's a strategic union between the Iranians and the Syrians. Not just because, but it started before the war, and I believe that it's one of the reasons that also this kind of takfiris, that they are the tools of the Saudis and some countries in the Middle East, that they don't like the Iranian, so they try to just to divide this kind of union between the Syrians and the Iranian. The Iranian, they are not shy, and all the time they say that we support the Syrian government, we support the Syrian army, and then we support the leader Bashar Assad. We want from the Syrians to have the control for all the Syrians to fight this kind of takfirs and to send them back to send them back to Saudi and to the other countries. And the Iranians, I believe that it's a regular business and it's a regular agreements between the Iranians and the Syrians, to have weapons between each other and also another technologies like the Israelis and the Americans, like the
well, when there's a war with 200,000 people dead, it's perhaps a bit more than regular business, but in the little time we have left, I want to go to Kalamoun. We have a serious fight going on there. Where does that stand?
This fight is preparing. This fight is prepared for since 2 months. They start with this like with the media. I believe, and what the sources say, that this kind of fight will dot the I's and cut the T's. And Hezbollah and the Syrian army, they are prepared. They prepare themselves very well. And they put there a lot of rockets, a lot of artillery, and
do they have the upper hand now?
They are there now, and they just start today and yesterday night, and the fights just start, slowly in different positions and regions there. And the goals that they have to achieve is to protect the Lebanese border there, and also to protect the Damascus borders, that this road that connect Lebanon and Damascus, which means the most safety road that we have now between Damascus and Lebanon.
Unfortunately, we don't even have time to get to Lebanon and to the Golan Heights, all different areas that have their own complexities linked to the Syrian civil war. Another time, Hamad Awida, thanks very much for this.
Thank you.
And we're going out for a 2-minute break, and we'll be back with the rest of the news today. Much more news. Stay with us. Just over 24 hours until the deadline to form a government, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu grapples to pull together what looks to be a weak and unstable coalition. In Geneva, the UN begins hosting talks with the Syrian government and some 40 different rival factions as Amnesty International reports evidence of war crimes in Aleppo. And U.S. President Barack Obama nominates Marine General Joseph Dunford as the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who, if approved, will have to take his experience in Afghanistan to advising Obama on the American fight against the Islamic State. Welcome back to the news today. We move now to Saudi Arabia, where Gulf monarchs are gathering today amid 2 major regional issues: the month-long Saudi-led campaign against Shiite rebels in Yemen, and of course growing concern within the Gulf countries over a possible nuclear deal with Iran. Also in attendance is French President François Hollande, the first Western leader to sit in on the GCC meeting. France is in the process of discussing major economic projects with Saudi Arabia at the same time. And with me is Iran Singer, Mideast editor of Israel Public Radio, to put some sense into all of this. First of all, the GCC summit, a very big deal given the broader regional chaos and the involvement of Saudi Arabia in it. I understand they've put out a statement recently. What was their bottom line?
Well, the bottom line is a message that has been announced, or that they're now sending from Saudi Arabia to Tehran, to Iran, saying that we, the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states, are willing to have normal ties, normal relations with the Iranians, but only in one condition, only if the Iranians stopped their interference, their involvement in what's going on right now in the Arab world, not only in Iraq or in Syria or...
Right, when we're talking about the Arab world, Iranian involvement, it's everywhere from Syria to Yemen. It's no small demand.
Indeed. The Iranians are using the vacuum, or are trying to get into this vacuum which was created by the end of the Arab Spring and of course with the whole of the new situation with ISIS. And what the Gulf states are saying right now, thank you very much, Iran, for helping us in trying to block ISIS, but we don't want you to stay here after this whole crisis is gone. Especially, and this is the most important thing, this summit that we're now seeing in Riyadh is taking place when a major crisis is still going on in Yemen. Now, the war in Yemen hasn't stopped. Maybe the specific operation, the military operation of the Saudis and the others has stopped only for a while, but this is a regional war. And
it's a much more long-term conflict.
Of course. And what they're saying is we are willing to discuss with the Iranians some measures in order to put an end to the crisis, but it will not happen unless the Iranians are stopping their aid, for instance, stopping assisting the rebels, the Shiite rebels in Yemen or in other places. Another major issue that has been discussed in the conference today, and this is even more important, I think, Syria. They have said, or they have announced, that a Syrian opposition conference will take place shortly in Saudi Arabia to discuss the day after Bashar al-Assad. In other words, if we have seen this united coalition, united Arab coalition working in Yemen, now they're going to work on Syria, which is a very big problem for Bashar al-Assad.
Very interesting and very complicated, as usual. Eran Singer, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
And while Hollande, the French president, is in Riyadh, an important French vote today in French Parliament. Lawmakers have passed a bill aimed at legalizing broad surveillance of terror suspects, an issue that has arisen in a number of countries over the last decade. It's also drawn an outcry from privacy advocates who say the collection and analysis of metadata is highly intrusive. The bill's sponsors say it's essential and urgent as radicalization in the West grows. And moving to the UK, on Thursday, Britain will head to the polls for general elections. With the outcome still uncertain, either David Cameron or Ed Miliband will have to share power with smaller parties to form a governing coalition. Miraf Severe has more.
Closing hours of this campaign, you can make all the difference with our country moving forward, not going backwards with Ed Miliband and the SNP. That's what it's about.
With just 2 days to go until the elections, the UK's parties are making final appeals to the undecided voters.
Let's elect a Labour government and make this country work for working people. Once again, thank you very much.
At the moment, it seems as if the elections will come down to one of two. Current Prime Minister David Cameron and opposition leader Ed Miliband remain neck and neck. But it seems as if both parties will only win around 33% of the vote. According to a poll, incumbent Cameron won the last televised debate, featuring himself, Miliband, and current Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Democrats, Nick Clegg.
I'm going to disappoint you because, look, we've got 7 days to go, and I'm going to fight everything I've got those next 7 days to get an overall majority.
But it may be all the others who really determine what happens. One of the parties to pay attention to on Thursday is the Scottish National Party, who's expected to pull voters away from the once influential in Scotland Labour and could become Britain's third largest. And Miliband promised his party would not work alongside the SNP.
Let me be plain. We're not going to do a deal with the Scottish National Party. We're not going to have a coalition. We're not going to have a deal. And let me just say this to you, Simon. If it meant we weren't going to be in government, not doing a coalition, not having a deal, then so be it.
Thursday's outcome remains uncertain as the hours tick down to what is set to be the closest elections in nearly 50 years.
And with me is London correspondent Jonathan Sashadati. Good evening. Thanks very much for being with me. So 48 hours to go, as we've seen in several other recent elections. The last moments, the last hours can actually make a big difference. What are the candidates' sort of strategies in this final stretch?
Well, in these final hours of campaigning, the party leaders are no longer just making manifesto promises. They're now also specifying which of their policies are red lines, that is, policies they won't negotiate away if they have to form a coalition. And while we've just come out of a period of coalition government here in the UK, that's not something voters are particularly used to, with our traditional first-past-the-post electoral system resulting in one-party government most of the time. So this is new ground for many people, hearing politicians promising not only what their policies are, but which of those policies they really mean they won't negotiate away if they have to form a coalition with another party.
And at this point, 2 days before, how are the polls faring? How are they faring there? Because we've seen a very tight race at this point.
All the way through this election campaign, there have been different polls on such a regular basis showing basically a neck-and-neck situation. One will edge the Conservatives slightly ahead, one will edge Labour slightly ahead, but never at the same time. And this has made it almost impossible for anyone to predict what will happen, except for the prediction that there may well be a hung parliament again, as there was last time. If things are as close as all the polls are showing, whether one party or the other wins, what will be the case is that the smaller parties like the Scottish National Party and the Liberal Democrats could hold the balance of power and choose who they go into coalition with. And that will, of course, determine who will be the government of this country.
So we're looking at a shifting political map in the UK in any case, it seems.
That's right, and increasingly, as this will be the second hung parliament, if it comes out that way in succession, you will find people calling for electoral reform so that this system, which traditionally worked well with two strong parties, one in government and one in opposition, might be reformed so as to give better representation to the wide range of votes that people have, and not so much power to the tiny parties, which can actually wield the deciding factor in seeing who's going to be in the government each time we end up with one of these hung parliaments. So it's definitely crunch time in some ways for this political system and this electoral system as we know it.
Jonathan, a lot of things are ringing similar to the discussion we had about Israeli politics at the beginning of the show. You'll be with us tomorrow and on Election Day for all the latest, all the results. Thanks very much for now.
Thanks.
Moving to the United States, U.S. President Barack Obama has nominated a replacement for General Martin Dempsey as the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If confirmed by the Senate, come September, Marine General Joseph Dunford will have his work cut out for him with crises across the Middle East, including, of course, the fight against the Islamic State. Danny Swibel has a look.
After a tumultuous 4-year period that saw most U.S. forces withdraw from Afghanistan, but thousands returned to Iraq, Army General Martin Dempsey will step down sometime in September as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with U.S. President Barack Obama naming General Joseph F. Dunford to the post at the White House on Tuesday. Dunford is currently serving as the Commandant of the Marine Corps and acted as the top military commander in Afghanistan before that, leading U.S. and international forces as they handed over greater responsibility to Afghan troops, battling a still resilient Taliban. Dunford must be confirmed by the Republican-controlled Senate before assuming the new position. Dunford earned the nickname Fighting Joe on the battlefields of Iraq, where he helped lead forces during the U.S. invasion in 2003. He was known as a calm and thoughtful leader who created conditions for success with careful planning and execution. His ability to grapple with the difficult transition from Iraq to Afghanistan made him a top contender for the post, as did his time at the helm of the Marine Corps. Dunford's nomination is also likely a reflection that even as President Obama prepares to leave office next year with a few fewer troops at war, he will still need a chairman with battlefield experience.
Of your Marines and their families, the Dunfords.
And now to economy. Joining me is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Lionel, good to have you back.
Good evening, Nora. Thank you.
So I understand tonight we're going from China to Greece. Let's begin with China. Some good news.
Good news, actually, according to the Wall Street Journal, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, actually is going to switch its policy regarding the RMB, the Chinese currency. For the past 10 years, they said it was undervalued. It actually was under the pressure of the US, and this time they said that the Chinese currency is now reaching a fair value, meaning the US are starting to lose the battle against China, because if the Chinese currency is at a fair value and the US dollar is raising, American corporates that exports are going to have much more trouble to go, for consumers.
So good news for China, maybe bad news for the US. Practically speaking, what does that mean for both economies?
definitely, the U.S. have been lobbying a lot of Chinese government to say, like the UN, is undervalued. You should increase the value of the Chinese country, and basically China saying no. We want to have a cheap currency because it helps, the Chinese corporates to export better in the world. So basically, the U.S. tried to impose on China, but China didn't say. They say no. The value is at a fair value, basically. So the U.S. now they are like facing some trouble because recently the U.S. dollar went up, and now the U.S. corporates are going to face some trouble for exporting.
So let's briefly look at Greece, which seems to always be bad news for
It's
you.
bad news, but it's worsening news, actually, according to, to the European Commission. It's all red flags, like debt, like the unemployment, the growth rate, basically Greece, is going to a wall. Basically, even the growth rate that was forecasted to be 2.5%, like this year for 2015, is now reduced to 0.5%.
The EU slashed it, the growth outlook.
Yeah, definitely, the growth outlook. No, the new outlook is 0.5%. So bad news for Greece.
All right, more bad news for Greece. Leonel Friedfeld, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Going now to Nepal, as recovery efforts continue in full force there, some international aid agencies are setting up relief centers for children to help them overcome the trauma of the disaster. The earthquake that hit on April 25th has affected some 1.7 million children. Overall, the UN says at least 2 million of the country's citizens are in need of tents, food, water, and medicine. And with me now from Kathmandu, Nepal, is Gilad Yakir, an aid volunteer in Nepal. Gilad, thanks very much for being with us.
Yeah, hello.
So you've been in some of these remote areas that have been hardest hit. Can you give me a bit of a picture of what it looks like there today?
Yeah, I tried to get to places which still got no relief effort, not at all. In the first week, even after 4 or 5 days, some villages had no helicopter support for the seriously injured people. So we managed to take some people down from there. And even a week after the earthquake, still there are some villages that had no food and no medical care at all, and it's just devastating. And I walked through many villages that are completely destroyed everywhere. And the help is coming really slowly, like the aid agencies and the Nepali army are still in the foothills. But in Nepal, it has so many isolated villages which still have yet to receive any help.
Gilad, from your perspective on the ground there, what does it look like are the sort of the biggest obstacles in getting to those remote villages? Some of them, as you say, that have aid hasn't even reached yet.
Yeah, so the biggest logistic problem is, of course, first of all, the terrain of Nepal, which is really difficult, and the earthquake also caused many landslides everywhere, so it's really difficult to get to these villages. The second thing, which is really sad, is the whole logistics thing about how the Nepal government is acting, which, in my view, they're acting really, really poorly. It took them around a week to just get out of the shock and start doing stuff. And also, it seems like it's really angers many people. It seems like they're freezing like donations of all kinds of organizations who try to help. We are just trying to help, and somehow the Nepali army and government are trying to stop us, which is it's a big shame.
Gilad, as you mentioned, there has been other criticism also of the government of how fast it responded, how it's been responding since. Do you see a difference, or the people, are they seeing a difference, at least in the Nepali government actions, their response from April 25th to today?
Yeah, I think the Nepali people are so resilient and so strong. It's pretty amazing to see them there. After a week, I already saw many villages they gave up hope of help, and they're just starting to rebuild themselves, they're starting to take care of themselves. And luckily in many villages I saw like they keep like a stack of food like under the house for like 6 months, and they just dig out and they just find the food. So I think of course they need food and they need to get the supplies they need, but luckily they're really strong people, and they take care of themselves, and they always did so.
Gilad Yakir in Kathmandu, thanks very much for this. And a sharp transition from Kathmandu to Milan, where the Expo 2015 launched earlier this week for the first time in 5 years. 120 countries are participating in the exhibition, putting on display all the latest in food and technology and sharing it with an estimated 20 million visitors. I-24 News correspondent Ayman Siksek spent 2 days there, from the rooftop of the American pavilion to the trampoline of the Brazilian one. Here's his report.
No Expo,
These are the signs we found walking through central Milan ahead of the contested exhibition. Graffiti on the city's walls called the organizers a mafia. But at the glamorous site of the expo, it was business as usual. As you can see, everyone is lining up outside. It's extremely difficult to get in unless you have this ticket. And it's the hottest ticket in town. Spanning 1.5 kilometers in length, the Expo 2015 is a multi-day project. Day 1 starts with the arts, with creative exhibits depicting man's relation to nutrition.
This is the tools room. It's a hall dedicated to the history of the instruments, so how the instruments and the tools of farming, fishing, hunting and breeding influenced the history of mankind.
And the focus of the Expo 2015 is feeding the planet, that is using technology to end world famine, but also getting back to basics.
This is probably one of the most important issues of our lifetime, which is how do we feed 9 billion people by 2050 in a sustainable, reliable way. And what we're trying to tell people is we're all one of those 9 billion people.
And as night falls over Milan, a reminder of the countries less fortunate in this point in time. The Nepalese pavilion was the only one unmanned by country officials. Flags were lowered to half-staff in honor of the victims of the earthquake.
It's pretty incredible that 800 million people every night go to bed either undernourished or malnourished around the world. That's 2.5 times the size of the United States.
Another Expo participant dealing with the shortage of resources is Palestine, whose exhibition illustrates the challenge of maintaining agriculture in the Middle East, a theme highlighted also by affluent countries like Dubai, Kuwait, and Qatar. Day 2 takes us across the political spectrum to Israel.
Here you have a country that, nevertheless, the short resource of land and water managed to cultivate twice as much quantity of rice, corn, and wheat.
A breakout star at the Expo, the Israeli pavilion is made up of a copy of a field located in Emek, Israel.
Many people come here, you see them enjoying making selfie photos or asking the family to get photos together.
But all seriousness aside, the Brazilian pavilion also wants to remind us that the Expo 2015 is about having some fun. Ayman Siksek, I-24 News, Milan.
And just back from Milan, back into our studios, correspondent and author Ayman Siksek. It looks like you had a good time there.
I had the best time to read, but I'll be sitting steady in this chair
for this
tonight.
Next part. So we're going from Milan to the Clintons.
That's right. We're going from a happy story to a suspense thriller, actually, from Peter Schweitzer this week. He's interested in how the Clintons moved from owing millions of dollars in legal fees in the year 2000 to amassing a fortune of over 130 million today.
I can see why he's interested in that. If they have a secret, I'd love to hear it. That's a huge difference.
It's no secret, but it appears that they're the only two that can pull this off. Now, most people think that they make this money from speaking engagements, which they do make a lot of money from that, but he's particularly interested in the Clinton Foundation, which is supposed to be a charitable organization.
And a very high-profile
an extremely high-profile one. And in this book, he really details and researches their ties with high ranks in the government, not so good-looking and slightly shady businessmen, and other people who gave them money in not so clear-cut ways.
A coincidence that this is soon after Hillary announced her bid for president?
Well, that's the interesting thing about this book. I think it's like a kaleidoscope. The supporters of Hillary and Bill Clinton will see it as an attack on the Clintons. People who oppose the Clintons will say, well, look, we were right all along. Now, it's a very, very important research. It's, of course, no coincidence that this is coming out now, after Hillary was forced to admit that they made mistakes with the Clinton Foundation over a few years. And it appears now that she will have to answer to this in a more clear-cut way. This book is really a huge blow, but not just to the Clintons. Really, the press is taking a lot of heat in this book as well. Schweitzer is saying that the press doesn't do any real research when covering the Clintons. He's exposing a few times when Clinton was speaking, Bill Clinton in Africa, and really just, he says, regurgitated the press release and was paid millions of dollars
Sounds
to do
familiar. It sounds like a familiar criticism from 2008 when there was a lot of criticism from the Republican side from the more conservative media outlets that free pass for Barack Obama, whether accurate or not.
And this is something I think he also identifies in the Clintons. He keeps raising the question of how is it that these two people who are so interested in the presidency keep making the same mistake. And he actually makes this comparison that money to Hillary is like illicit sex to Bill. They just can't get enough.
I guess he just had to make that comparison, right? You can't
It's
write a book
one.
about the Clintons
It's a
without
really
it.
good
It is a
one.
good one. It's a good one. And it makes me want to read it also. I'm in Six Tech. Thanks very much for
Thank
this.
you, Noit.
And a conference got underway this week at the Dead Sea focused on preserving Jewish sites in Egypt, a country whose archaeological treasures have fallen victim to years of chaos. Mirav Sevir went to see how they're planning to do it.
Several dozen members of the Egyptian Jewish diaspora arrived in the Dead Sea on Sunday for a three-day conference. Most of them are first generation and fled their home country in what became known as the Second Exodus. Events got underway with the screening of an upcoming documentary about the Jews of Egypt by Elliot Malki, who himself left Egypt at the age of 18.
The moment they confiscated all my father's assets in the 60s, very early 60s, it was almost impossible to carry on life normally.
I have beautiful memories of Cairo. Until 1948.
The focus for the 2015 convention is the preservation of Jewish sites in Egypt. With the emergence of the Islamic State and the destruction of historical sites in Iraq, the fear is growing that these beloved buildings could also be destroyed.
They did something terrible in Iraq. So it's a total despair. It's a pity.
The topic of preserving Jewish sites in Arab countries was presented to UNESCO Secretary General Irina Bokova last June.
UNESCO, they are talking and doing preservation of holy sites, of Muslim holy sites, of Christian holy sites. They didn't touch yet the Jewish holy sites in Arab lands.
And whether the preservation of these sites is a priority is also something some disagree on.
I think this is not an aim very useful for the next generation, because the next generation, they will hardly go to visit Egypt at the synagogue.
For some, it's simple. These buildings need to be preserved so the world knows that once upon a time, Jews lived in Egypt.
It proves that we were there for thousands of years. If it's gone, then there is no history and there is nothing to tell the world that we existed.
And now to sports. And with me, who else but host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev.
Of course.
Good evening, but
Good
of
evening,
course, and I have to say, after the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, I think it's hard to beat in terms of excitement and lead up to any other match.
It's true, because it was the fight of the century. Really, it's things that happen. I think the last time there was a fight that was so anticipated was about 50 years ago. So really, that was a big event.
But we'll try to gather some excitement for the Champions League also.
We'll speak of the Champions League semifinal, which is huge. On the other hand, it happens every year.
Right.
We don't have to wait once a century for that. Still,
and they're not getting paid $120-ish million.
No, not that much.
But they're well off.
We shouldn't feel sorry for them. Don't worry about that.
All right.
Juventus against Real Madrid. That's the first game tonight in less than an hour. Big game. When the draw was held around 2 weeks ago and Real Madrid got Juventus in the draw, people said that's the easier draw. Well, yeah, it may be easier than facing Barcelona or Bayern Munich, the other two semifinalists. On the other hand, Juventus is a very good team. Players like Carlos Tevez, Arturo Vidal, Paul Pogba, Buffon, the goalkeeper. Very strong squad. And a bit like Real Madrid, Juventus is a winning team. They're winners. They're a team that knows how to play in the big stages. They know how to win titles. So yes, they may not be favorites against Real Madrid. I don't know if anyone is favored against Real Madrid with the squad they have. But it's going to be a huge battle for the Spanish side, especially tonight in Turin, in Italy. certainly one to watch for. And if Juventus goes on to win the qualifier and qualify to the final, I don't think it will be such a big surprise.
So bring us all the details of that match tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And until then, it's back to Rio again.
Yes.
Always in the headlines.
We've spoke so much about the Guanabara Bay, where the sailing events will take place, and all the contamination there. And the dignitaries, they want to show that everything is all right, nothing to worry. So the men we're going to see now plunging into the water, that's the environment minister of the state of Rio de Janeiro. What does he do? Goes to the middle of the bay and he jumps in. Yes, he makes a statement. Look at the water, everything is fine. Does that mean it does make an echo?
Maybe we need to check back with him in a couple of days.
Yes, on the other hand, this is what the bay looks like, and it's dirty and it's awful. If the minister jumped in, maybe it's safe. Still, I would not want to sail when these things float around me. I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. Minister, I don't.
Doesn't look convincing yet.
No.
And lastly, some kind of scary, crazy, adventurous, what is it this time?
What you're all looking for, I know. It's called the Extreme Games. It happened in Shanghai over the weekend. And this is the latest event. It was called the BMX Mega Mini. And this is what these people do. They perform these really, really big stunts. They go down, flip up in the air, and then go down. This is what it looks like. Scary indeed. On the other hand, sometimes when they go down, they actually go down. Don't worry, he's safe.
He's okay.
Yeah, he's safe. He's safe, but those things happen, and it's a scary event.
As extreme as it is, if you make a mistake, it's also extreme.
Yes, we love to watch it, and it's beautiful, and they float up in the air. Those people, it may be scary and painful sometimes.
All right, well, they chose to do it, and it's incredible. Jonathan Regev, thank you very much for this. And we're going out for a 2-minute break. Just after the break, the Daily Debate, the organization Breaking the Silence, has a new report on the IDF's operations in Gaza over the summer, Operation Protective Edge. A lot of controversy. Some agree, some disagree. We'll look at the whole picture. Don't go anywhere. 2 minutes, and we'll be back.